The morning of her wedding dawned beneath a veil of pale London fog, the kind that softened spires and chimneys and made even certainty appear distant, and yet nothing in her life had ever felt so decisively arranged. At 27, she stood before the tall mirror in her family's townhouse, her posture composed, her expression calm, knowing that this day had been discussed, negotiated, and quietly judged for years before it ever arrived. She was not young by society's tender standards, nor was she considered fragile or dazzling, but she possessed a steadiness that had long made her useful to others and invisible to herself. Silk brushed her wrists as she adjusted her gloves, ivory against skin, and she reflected that marriage, for women like her, was less a vow of the heart than a formal conclusion to prolonged expectation. Outside, carriages gathered, their polished doors bearing crests heavy with history, while servants moved briskly, rehearsed in their reverence. The Duke's name drifted through the house in low, respectful tones, as though it were already etched into stone. He was young, handsome by any fair measure, and burdened with an inheritance whose demands shaped every decision he made. Their union had been approved by guardians, praised by acquaintances, and dissected in drawing rooms where affection mattered less than lineage. She had met him often enough to recognize his restraint, his careful courtesy, and the faint distance that never entirely closed between them, yet she had accepted these qualities as signs of his rank, not warnings of his resolve. Her older sister moved through the adjoining room, radiant in a way that drew eyes without effort, her beauty sharpened by confidence and long familiarity with admiration. Though age separated them only by a handful of years, society regarded the elder as the more suitable prize, her charms better advertised, her presence more commanding. Still, it was the younger sister who stood as the chosen bride, the one selected for her patience, her quiet compliance, and her family's strategic advantage. That knowledge, long settled in the mind, lent the morning a strange stillness, as if the outcome had already been written and need only be witnessed. When the hour approached, she descended the stairs with measured grace, her steps echoing softly as if mindful of the moment's gravity. Conversations hushed as she passed, not out of reverence, but appraisal, for she was being weighed even now against what she would soon become. Outside, the bells of the nearby church waited in silence, their ropes drawn, ready to announce a future that appeared inevitable. She entered the carriage beside her mother, the door closing with a finality that stirred something uneasy in her chest, though she smoothed it away with practiced resolve. The church doors stood open, a promise of ritual and order. Yet as the Duke approached, his expression betrayed a tension that did not belong to ceremony alone. He halted before the assembled guests, his gaze shifting briefly, almost helplessly, toward her sister, who stood apart, luminous and unreadable. A murmur rippled through the pews, subtle at first, then swelling with curiosity. The heroine sensed the change before she understood it, a tightening in the air, a collective intake of breath, as though London itself anticipated a deviation from a script. When he spoke, his voice carried the trained authority of his station, but beneath it lay strain, and perhaps fear. He did not look at her, as he announced that circumstances, obligations, and the counsel of those wiser than himself compelled him to alter his choice. He spoke of inheritance, of alliances, of duty, words that struck with precision, each one distancing her further from the life she had been prepared to enter. Finally, he named her sister as the woman he would wed, declaring the decision necessary, inevitable, and regrettable, though regret sounded thin beside resolve. Silence followed, dense and astonished, before whispers erupted like sparks across dry ground. Eyes turned toward her, searching for tears, outrage, collapse, but she offered none of these. She remained still, her hands folded, her expression unchanged, though the blood had drained from her face. In that moment, she understood that humiliation, when shared publicly, demanded discipline, not surrender. Her sister's beauty seemed suddenly a weapon neither had chosen, and the Duke's gaze, now filled with apology, failed to find forgiveness in her steady eyes. The bells did not ring. Instead, the church stood suspended in discomfort, a monument to a promise undone. Servants hesitated, uncertain of their duties, while guests recalculated their sympathies with remarkable speed. Some pitied her, others judged her insufficient, and many simply noted the spectacle as proof that a woman's worth could be revised without her consent. She inclined her head, acknowledging the announcement as one might accept an unfavorable verdict, and turned away before the murmurs could harden into commentary. By evening, London had already begun to shape the story in its own image, refining the shock into gossip and speculation. She returned home quietly, refusing consolation that felt like condescension, and packed only what was necessary. Her decision to leave was not dramatic, nor was it explained, but it carried the weight of survival. She would not remain where every glance reminded her of being found wanting. As night settled, she departed for the countryside, carrying with her a dignity uncelebrated and a resolve untested, while behind her, society resumed its chatter, confident that her story had already ended. The countryside received her without ceremony, its lanes quiet, its skies wide, as though it neither knew nor cared what had been taken from her in London. She arrived at a modest estate lent by distant relations, stone-walled and softened by age, where the air smelled of damp earth and would smoke rather than perfume and ambition. Here, no one stared openly, yet everyone seemed aware that she carried a history best left unexplored. She settled into the rhythm of rural days with deliberate calm, rising early, walking the grounds, and discovering that solitude, once feared, could become a form of shelter. Her dignity, untested by admiration, found expression in small acts of usefulness. She organized repairs for tenant cottages, oversaw accounts with quiet competence, and listened patiently to grievances others dismissed. Though she rarely spoke of herself, her manner revealed an intelligence sharpened by disappointment and a kindness unburdened by expectation. Gradually, she became known not as the woman cast aside at the altar, but as a presence steady enough to be relied upon. It was a transformation subtle enough to pass unnoticed by those who valued spectacle, yet profound enough to alter her own understanding of worth. It was during this season of cautious renewal that she first encountered the naval officer, a man newly settled nearby. His name spoken with respect tinged by curiosity. He had returned from years at sea bearing honors granted by the crown, yet his manner was marked more by restraint than pride. Widowed young, he carried grief like an old wound, neither hidden nor displayed, shaping his silences as much as his words. Their meeting was unremarkable in setting, a simple introduction arranged by neighbors, yet something in his attentive composure distinguished him from others she had known. He did not examine her as London once had, measuring her for advantage or novelty, but regarded her with a quiet attentiveness that felt unfamiliar. Conversation between them unfolded carefully, bounded by courtesy, yet threaded with mutual recognition. He spoke of the sea with a reverence that suggested both devotion and exhaustion, while she described the countryside as one might describe a refuge discovered by necessity rather than choice. Neither asked questions that pressed too close, but both listened as though the answers mattered. As weeks passed, their paths crossed often, always in plain sight, always proper. They walked along hedgerows in measured steps, discussing books, weather, and the shifting temper of the nation, recently relieved from the long strain of war. In his presence, she felt no need to defend her composure, for he seemed to accept it as a fact rather than a performance. For him, her steadiness offered something he had not known since before loss reshaped his days, a calm untroubled by the expectations that clung to rank. A small incident, scarcely noticed by others, altered the tone of their acquaintance. One afternoon, she returned a book he had lent her, its pages marked lightly with her pencil, notes restrained but thoughtful. He received it with visible appreciation, remarking that few took such care with words they borrowed. The exchange was simple, yet it carried a significance that lingered after they parted, as though trust had been extended without ceremony. That book became, in memory, a token of understanding, modest yet charged with meaning. Inevitably, attention followed. In villages, kindness was currency, but curiosity was its shadow. Whispers arose, not cruel at first, but persistent, suggesting impropriety where there was only companionship. Some recalled her past with a knowing tilt of the head. Others questioned his intentions, measuring them against his lack of title. The heroine sensed the shift and withdrew slightly, mindful that she could not endure another spectacle. The officer noticed as well, his manner growing more reserved, his visits less frequent, though his regard remained unchanged. The restraint pained her more than gossip ever could, for it suggested fear of harm rather than indifference. When at last they spoke of it, their exchange was marked by careful phrasing and unspoken urgency. He acknowledged the rumors without resentment, expressing concern for her reputation above his own comfort. She responded with honesty that surprised even herself, admitting that solitude, once chosen, had begun to feel imposed again. The moment passed without resolution, yet it altered their understanding, revealing that restraint, though protective, could wound as deeply as boldness. Word of her renewed visibility reached London in fragments, exaggerated and distorted, as gossip tends to be. The Duke's name surfaced occasionally, attached to regret or dissatisfaction, though she neither sought nor welcomed such reports. What mattered more was the knowledge that she stood once again at a threshold, not of obligation, but of choice. The countryside, once merely a refuge, had become a place where her decisions carried consequence. One evening, as dusk settled and lamps were lit, the officer left at her door a small parcel, unannounced, containing the book she had returned, now bound more finely, its margins still bearing her marks. No note accompanied it, yet the gesture spoke plainly of regard that endured despite caution. She held it for a long while, aware that acceptance of such a gift might invite further scrutiny, but also knowing that refusal would deny something newly awakened. As she closed the door, the murmurs of the village distant and indistinct, she realized that the life she was building could not remain untouched by the world forever. The past had followed her even here, and the future, undefined yet stirring, demanded courage she was only beginning to claim. The rain arrived without warning, drawing a veil across the fields and forcing those outdoors to seek shelter. And it was beneath this softened sky that the moment she had both anticipated and feared finally unfolded. She had invited him in only because propriety allowed no alternative, and yet as the door closed behind them, the quiet felt charged, as though the house itself understood that something long restrained demanded speech. Firelight caught the edges of the room, illuminating familiar furnishings that now seemed witnesses rather than comforts. They stood at a respectful distance, both aware that formality had begun to feel insufficient. He spoke first, not with the confidence of command he once held at sea, but with careful humility, acknowledging the unease that had grown between them. He admitted that restraint, once a shield, had become a burden, and that his concern for her name had been sincere but incomplete. To protect her by withdrawal, he realized, was to decide for her, and that error weighed heavily upon him. She listened without interruption, her expression composed yet intent, and when she replied, her voice carried a steadiness sharpened by truth. She told him of the morning she had been set aside, not as a confession of pain, but as an explanation of resolve. She had learned, she said, that silence invited decisions made by others, and that dignity did not require absence, only clarity. To be spared gossip was not the same as being spared loneliness, and she would not exchange one for the other again. The admission altered something between them, replacing caution with understanding. He responded by speaking of his own loss, of a marriage entered with affection but ended too soon, leaving him wary of desire's power to unmoor. He had believed himself finished with such risk, content to live honorably and alone, until he encountered a woman who did not demand rescue, nor offer herself as consolation. In her presence, he said, he felt seen without being claimed, and it frightened him more than battle ever had. Their words settled into the space between them, each confession neither dramatic nor excessive, but deliberate, as though truth itself required discipline. She told him she would not be chosen out of pity, nor sheltered as a fragile thing, and he assured her that what he offered was neither. If he admired her, it was for the very composure others mistook for passivity, and if he desired her company, it was because her steadiness invited his own. They stood then on equal ground, neither indebted, neither diminished. The rain softened, tapping gently at the windows, and with it came an interruption neither had summoned. News arrived from London, carried by letter and spoken aloud only once, revealing the Duke's growing dissatisfaction and the strain within his hastily secured marriage. The information stirred no triumph in her, only a quiet confirmation that choices made for ambition rarely satisfied the heart. She recognized in that moment that her past no longer defined her present, though it still sought to claim her future. The officer watched her read the letter, observing the calm with which she folded it away, and understood that what lay before them could not remain private indefinitely. Society would eventually intrude, demanding explanation, judgment, and decision. He did not ask her to choose him then, nor did he retreat, but offered instead a simple declaration, that whatever scrutiny came, he would meet it openly, provided she wished the same. The offer, unadorned and patient, carried a weight greater than promise. She considered him in the firelight, seeing not a savior or a refuge, but a man willing to stand beside her without pretense. The realization unsettled her more than uncertainty ever had, for it required courage not only to accept affection, but to risk happiness openly. She told him she would not hide again, nor would she allow herself to be guided by fear disguised as prudence. If she were to step forward, it would be by choice, not reaction. They agreed, then, to proceed without secrecy, their understanding unspoken yet firm, and the decision brought with it a sense of release neither had anticipated. When he departed, the night air cool and cleansed by rain, she remained by the door longer than necessary, aware that the stillness she had once cultivated was giving way to expectation. It was not anxiety that followed, but resolve, steady and unfamiliar, urging her toward a future she had not been permitted to imagine. In the days that followed, the village observed their renewed association with sharper attention, noting his presence beside her without apology and her own refusal to retreat. Whispers grew bolder, yet so did her composure, and she found that judgment lost its sting when faced directly. She had endured the worst of public scrutiny once and survived with her dignity intact. She would not surrender it now to preserve appearances already compromised. When word arrived that London society would soon gather nearby for a formal event, drawing old acquaintances and inevitable comparisons, she felt the weight of what approached. The past, long held at a careful distance, was preparing to confront her anew, and this time she would not flee. As she looked out across the fields, green and resilient beneath the clearing sky, she understood that the choice she had made in quiet would soon demand its declaration aloud, and that whatever followed would mark the true beginning of her life. The gathering arrived as expected, bringing with it polished carriages, familiar names, and the quiet cruelty of recollection. Yet she entered the hall with a composure earned rather than assumed. Candlelight reflected from crystal and silk, illuminating faces that had once watched her humiliation with avid interest, and though she felt their scrutiny, it no longer commanded her spirit. She stood beside the naval officer openly, neither clinging nor distant, her presence calm enough to disarm speculation before it could gather force. Whispers followed them, restrained by etiquette yet persistent, tracing old narratives and testing new ones. Some observed his lack of title, others recalled her broken engagement, and many waited to see whether confidence would falter under such collective memory. She did not rush her steps nor lower her gaze, for she had learned that retreat only sharpened curiosity. Each measured movement asserted that she belonged in any room she chose to enter. When the Duke appeared, his arrival carried none of the triumph once expected of him. Marriage had altered him in ways ambition never predicted, leaving his manner subdued, his authority less certain. He acknowledged her with a polite inclination of the head, his eyes holding regret unadorned by appeal. In that brief exchange, she recognized how thoroughly she had been released from his judgment, and how little power his opinion now held. The officer, observing this interaction, did not intervene, trusting her strength rather than asserting his own. His restraint spoke more clearly than defense ever could, signaling respect rather than possession. When conversation drew them together among acquaintances, he addressed her as an equal, his words deliberate and warm, revealing admiration without spectacle. Those listening began to recalibrate their assessments, surprised by the ease with which she commanded regard. As the evening progressed, Attention shifted from speculation to acceptance, for society, though harsh, was adaptable when presented with confidence. The heroine felt the weight of anticipation lessen, replaced by a quiet readiness to speak what had long remained private. When the moment came, prompted by inquiry rather than challenge, she answered plainly, acknowledging her intention to marry not for advantage, but for affection and mutual esteem. The declaration, simple and unembellished, carried a finality that left little room for dispute. The officer followed her words with his own, expressing respect for her character and gratitude for her choice, neither defending nor excusing their union. His statement, delivered with measured conviction, reframed the narrative others had prepared, transforming curiosity into acknowledgment. In that instant, their partnership ceased to be a topic of debate and became a fact to be recognized. Later, as the gathering dispersed and night reclaimed its quiet authority, they walked together beyond the glow of lanterns, the air cool and steady. She reflected on the path that had brought her here, marked by disappointment yet guided by resolve, and understood that happiness, when chosen freely, required no embellishment. The future before them was neither extravagant nor uncertain, but honest, shaped by shared purpose rather than imposed design. Their marriage followed without spectacle, witnessed by those who mattered and unburdened by those who did not. It was conducted with dignity, rooted in mutual respect, and marked by vows spoken with clarity rather than haste. As she stood beside him, she felt no echo of the past intruding upon the present, only a sense of arrival long deferred. In the months that followed, their life settled into a rhythm both gentle and resilient, enriched by conversation, shared labor, and quiet affection. She found in partnership what she had never known in promise, and he discovered in her a strength that complemented his own. Together, they navigated a world that no longer defined her by rejection, but by the choices she had claimed. Though society would always remember her story, it no longer dictated its meaning. She had transformed humiliation into independence, and independence into contentment, without surrendering grace. As seasons turned and the countryside bloomed once more, she understood that the truest victory lay not in vindication, but in fulfillment earned through courage. Standing at the threshold of her home, watching light fade across familiar fields, she recognized that her journey had not ended, but begun anew, grounded in affection freely given and equally received. The world beyond remained imperfect and exacting, yet she faced it with assurance, knowing that her happiness rested not on approval, but on the quiet certainty of having chosen well.